I mean, there's so much advice for small businesses and small business owners about marketing their small business is about getting out there. You need to be visible. You need to be, it's such extrovert friendly advice. And it's like, well, how does that work if that's not the way you want to do business, if that's not the way you want to, we can all occasionally do the extrovert thing, but it's tiring. You can't sustain running and marketing a business, if it doesn't feel comfortable to you. So the book takes, some of the conversations and some of the thinking in that came from the podcast and some of my own stories and experiences and things that have worked for me as well. But it's typical advice is it's very extrovert, I think.
Hello, and welcome to episode 142 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review. That would mean a lot to me. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Jenny Procter is an experienced marketing consultant and host of the successful Marketing for Introverts podcast. She discovered she was an introvert while in a room full of extroverts in 2010, and it was truly a light bulb moment. As an introvert and small business owner, Jenny believes that everyone can find a way to market their business and get more visible in a way that suits them. Her approach is supportive and endlessly practical. She works with service businesses to define their audience, get clarity about their offer, and define their niche before consistently delivering the marketing tactics that work while resisting the latest shiny marketing tools. She has been described as a safe pair of hands and the person who can bring calm and clarity to any marketing challenge. Working with hundreds of small businesses in her consultancy, Jenny's early career was spent in corporate communications roles, organizing government conferences, defending late trains on live radio, and advising NHS and local government leaders. Jenny lives in Staffordshire Village with her two children, one introvert and one extrovert, and works happily and peacefully in her home office. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Jenny. It's so good to have you on today.
Hello, it's lovely to see you, David.
All right, Jenny, we're going to talk about marketing for introverts. But of course, before we do that, let's hear a little bit more about you and your story, being an introvert and now helping other introverts with their marketing.
Yeah, so probably like a lot of introverts listening, I always knew I was something, but I didn't necessarily have a word for it. When I went to college, more years than I'm going to confess to you, but when I went off to college, a lot of the other friends I made at college had, by the end of the first term, so maybe 10, 12 weeks into being at college, they had made good friends with the entire campus. And I knew maybe 3 or 4 people, so I knew it's at that point really quite early on that I was different. I wasn't quite maybe as sociable as some people. And when I went off to work, the same thing. I would be sitting in meetings and everybody else was offering their opinions very freely. And I was, thinking about it very deeply and coming up with exactly the right thing to say, after I'd left the meeting. So, I'm sure some of those scenarios are familiar to your listeners, but actually getting the word introvert didn't come to me till much later. I was probably late 30s maybe, and I did a personality test as part of a study program I was doing, and I realized I was in a room where most of the other students were male, and they were all extroverts, and I was one of very few females, and I was very firmly an introvert, a very long way on the introvert scale. So I suddenly thought, oh, that's why I don't feel very comfortable in this room, and that's why I didn't feel very comfortable in some of my kind of corporate environments. So yeah, the word introvert came to me quite late, but even then it took a little while to realize that was a good thing. Actually, introversion wasn't a defective extrovert. I think it probably took until I read Susan Cain's book Quiet to realize, oh yes, we are great people. There are some great introverts in the world. We can do great things. So yeah, it's been quite a a long, gradual process, I guess, of learning about introversion, and that I am indeed an introvert.
So when you took this personality test, was it like a workshop setting?
I'm just trying to think. No, I think it was something that I did. You mean, were we all sort of doing it in the room together? Can you
Yeah,
imagine how
yeah.
scary that would be? No, I think it was one of these things we sort of took it away and did it on our own, and then came back. Um, but yeah, realizing that I was hard left on the introvert scale, or
Okay, okay.
the extreme end of the scale anyway. So okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that now I'm starting to see why this is a slightly, as I say, slightly uncomfortable environment. All these very loud blokes in the room, and there was me.
Yeah. And then Susan Cain's been mentioned numerous times on
I'm
this show,
sure.
and I recommend her book Quiet as
Yeah.
well. It was definitely helpful for me and many other people. What caused you to pick up that book?
I don't remember now, because I've had it such a long time, and I think it came out in 2012, something like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I didn't have
2012.
it certainly when it came out initially, but I don't remember whether somebody recommended it to me, or whether I was just browsing online and came across it. I genuinely can't remember, but I think it, as a book, it made such a huge impact. And I mean, it's not an easy read, is it? It's not something that you kind of whisk through in a weekend. It's quite an academic, thorough exploration of introversion, but it's made such a difference to my life, to my work, to my practice. And yes, when I speak about it to other introverts, exactly the same. Oh, thank goodness that book made such a difference to so many people. And I'm definitely one of those.
What were some keys that made you realize, hey, this is a good thing? How did you embrace your introversion as part of this?
But I think it's that focus on strengths, isn't it? So it's not about saying, oh, you're not very good at this, you're not very good at that. Introverts have very decided strengths. We are great, listeners, problem solvers. We are the people who will get things, thought about and done, and come back with, some seriously considered ideas to a problem. I think Susan Cain talks about it in kind of leadership terms, doesn't she? Introverts being very great, very good leaders, because they will consider the opinions of everybody in the room, and they will take time to properly kind of unpick and understand a problem. So I think it's some of those kind of those focuses which are really helpful, as opposed to the very, very kind of tired and inaccurate. Introverts are shy and antisocial. I mean, all of those things are not helpful. So yeah, I think it's when you start to realize good examples of introverts. Oh yeah, okay, there are some really very great strengths that we have as as a group.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like you said, it's not about that we're defective extroverts, and that we do have great strengths, and that we can do anything. We just might do it differently. We might succeed differently. We might have different needs. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What's a strength that you've discovered for yourself as an introvert?
I think I'm a good listener. I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I'm sure everybody says that about themselves. But I think I like listening to a problem, listening to a client and their, as they talk about their business, and trying to unpick that. So I think I have the kind of patience to listen, and I hope I'm empathetic as well. I hope I can kind of support a client, or understand what their issues and challenges are. Yeah, I think I'm not sure if I'm the world's best problem solver. I know some very technical introverts who would say, and I would say they are the problem solvers. In my family, there are one or two very very techie, very very engineering kind of minded introverts, and I'm not that person. But I would say I'm the listener and the empathetic person in the in my family of introverts.
Yeah, we're all going to be a little different. I think we share that, we turn inward. We're deep thinkers. And so you're listening, but then you're also giving that some thought for you and for your clients. And we may not think deeply about the same things or have the same skills, but we definitely, a strength is that we're thinking deeply, that we're turning inward. And a lot of good comes from that.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's about being quite self-contained. Um, I know plenty of people for whom long periods on their own would be, they would struggle with it. They would panic with it. Extroverted friends would I mean, it's a little while since we were all in lockdown, but people reacted to that very differently, and actually, that's okay. I can be on my own, and quite happily on my own in my own company. So I think I think like it's a great strength, isn't it? I don't need to have lots of people around me in order to be kind of happy and to function well.
Yeah, I think that's key too. It's sometimes we do need to spend time alone for lots of different reasons. We need to think, recharge, be strategic. There's so many reasons. But then sometimes we don't mind it. It's like
Depends on the people, doesn't it? Let's be
depends
honest.
on the people. Yeah, it depends on the people. And I don't like when the definition is like we get drained by people. I'm like, well, sometimes, sometimes not, but it just depends on the situation and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So part of all this discovery is also, learning what you need. What did you learn that you really needed as an introvert that might be different from an extrovert colleague or friend?
I started working for myself about 10 or 11 years ago now. And I think I had, up to that point, I was working in local government actually, in a big open plan office, a big team of marketing people in a big organization. And I stepped away from that and I started working for myself. And I realized that actually I could work very effectively, almost more effectively by myself in my house than in a big kind of corporate environment. So that was an important point. And I think, I have two children as well, and there are moments when, bless them, but there are moments when being out of the company of my children, I need to recharge because they're very peoply people. so yeah, I think that and that's not to say that my children aren't amazing, obviously, but I think there's a work context where introversion is, you can kind of manage that for yourself, so you can work for yourself, and there's a family context, and sometimes it's okay as well to say within the family context, I need some time on my own now.
Yeah, that can definitely be tricky because you love your family, but sometimes you need a little bit of space, and that can be tricky to articulate that. Like, hey, you know what? I need this. I love you, but I just need a little space to get this work done, or just
Yeah.
recharge, or whatever it is. And that can definitely be tricky to articulate those needs. This podcast is all about the strengths, needs of introverts, and we also bust myths. You busted a couple myths that were, you said that we weren't shy. Is there any other myths you want to add to that are common out there?
Oh, there's plenty of. I think one that followed me around when I was probably a teenager, is that introverts are stuck up. Maybe it was just me. I don't know whether this is one that kind of resonates for other introverts, but we moved house. My family moved house when I was about 11 or 12, and I moved to a different part of the UK, and I didn't have the same accent as the other kids. So already I sort of stuck out a little
Right.
bit. And I was quite a bookish, I was a reader and a quite quiet. And yeah, the kind of the perception that I was stuck up, and that introverts are that they think they're a bit better than everybody else. It's like, oh, and as I say, it followed me around, that one, David, for a little while. And it's not true. It's just I'm listening. I'm observing. I'm not diving in. It's not that I think I'm better than anybody else at all. It's just it's just the way I'm kind of processing. So yeah, and I think the antisocial thing as well. We've talked about that. We're not antisocial. We just need the right people at the right times in the right quantities. But the fact that introverts can't do things, we can't be public speakers, or we can't, we can't sell, or some of those things. I started my marketing for introverts. It started as a podcast, and I started with the idea that maybe there were types of marketing that that introverts couldn't do. There were things that were good for us, and things that weren't our style at all. And the very first person I interviewed had done a TED talk, and I thought, oh well, there you go. That's my myth completely out of the water. She's done a TED talk. It's a very exposing. It's a very kind of in the spotlight kind of marketing. So yeah, I think we can do all sorts of things. There are plenty of myths. We can do anything we like, but maybe we need to do it in a slightly different way. But I'm still, I have to say, I'm still never going to do a TED talk. That still terrifies me.
No, you could do it. And again, it's just like I love public speaking, and I
Okay.
learned I did a lot of public speaking with an extroverted friend of mine, and I just noticed the way that we prepared was so different. and
Okay.
but and she definitely wanted to be more spontaneous. And she did, everybody has to prepare to some degree, but I definitely took more time preparing and gave it a lot more thought, and it's just different. So, we can do whatever we need to do. It just might look different. We can be great leaders or great at marketing or whatever it is. So let's talk about that, about the marketing. So you
Yeah.
you have a podcast called Marketing for Introverts and a book called Marketing for Introverts. So how did you get started with the podcast?
So the podcast, well, rolling back a couple of years, marketing for introverts was born when I was listening to another marketing consultant talk. And I was at a networking group, and she was talking about her business and her consultancy, and I was listening to her thinking, oh my goodness, nobody's ever going to want to work with me. She was bold, she was bright, she was sassy, she was swearing quite a lot. She was a lot of fun, and she was very kind of bold and out there. And I thought nobody's going to want to work with me because I'm completely the opposite to her. And a very wise lady, a coach that I knew actually, said, Jenny, while you were looking at her and thinking she's great, she's so much better than I am, I was looking around the room, and for every person who was looking at her thinking, yes, great, she's the marketing consultant I would like to work with, there were other people for whom she wasn't their person. They didn't like her approach. They didn't like her swearing. She just was not their person. And those are your people. And I thought that's really interesting because, as a marketer, kind of taking your audience and segmenting it, it's like that kind of made sense. But I thought, what's the thing here? What's the difference? So I made a very bold and unusual step for me, and I contacted the other marketing consultant. We had coffee, and we realized that she was an extrovert and I was an introvert, and all those, and I'd read Susan Cain by that point, and all the pennies kind of dropped. So, marketing for introverts, that's what I am, and that's what I do. So scroll forward to 2020, and I thought, this is an interesting conversation. I'd like to have this conversation with other people, and I'd like to explore this a little bit more. And I was sort of trying to write blog posts, but I wasn't very good at writing enough consistent blog posts. And I thought, I wonder if a podcast is the way to go. And just something about, I was able to be much more organized about how the podcast kind of went out into the world. And it started from there. And it started as, some of them were interviews, some of them, sometimes it's me talking about a marketing issue, but just so many interesting conversations I would like to have had anyway, but it's much easier to contact somebody, isn't it, and say, do you want to come on my podcast, rather than, have you got an hour? We can just discuss that thing that I'm really interested in. So it's a much, people are much more likely to say yes when you invite them on a podcast. So yeah, it's gone from there. And yeah, just the interesting conversation and the common themes. I'm sure you have the same thing. People with similar experiences of introversion, similar barriers, similar barriers they've had to kind of overcome, other people's expectations. The same books, as you say, Susan Cain comes up a lot. So yeah, it started from there, and it's still a fascinating conversation every time I speak to somebody new.
Yeah, so what you said at the beginning there, it's fascinating because sometimes people think that everybody wants that extroverted leader, consultant, coach, and it's just not true. I did a couple different things. Like I said, I spoke with an extroverted friend numerous times. I also did with a different person. I did some workshops for many people. And that was the thing that I told myself, is that some people are really the extroverts, and other similar personality types are going to relate to her. But there's going to be many people that are not going to relate to her, that are going to relate to me. And that's so important to understand. And there's such a misconception that, oh, everybody wants that. And I've said many times on this show that with like leadership, sometimes the myth out there is that everybody wants the large and in charge person who's, giving orders and all that stuff. And there's a myth that that's how leadership should be. But I think in reality, most people do not want that kind of leadership, even though there's a thought that it should be like that, where an introvert can be an amazing leader, maybe a very good strategic thinker and lots of other things. So that's something that we really got to remember is And maybe back to Susan Cain, it's kind of like that, what she calls the extrovert ideal. It's not really true.
It's not. Now, that's really interesting you say that, because I've worked with a couple of chief executives in my my employed career, before I started working for myself, who were, when I look back on it, were introverts. And exactly that. They weren't the kind of, I like the expression large and in charge. I'm gonna borrow that, but they weren't that person at all. What they were very good at, and they were both in kind of public sector organizations, but both very good at building relationships. So these were operational organizations. We had teams throughout a large part of the country. They were very good at kind of dropping in to talk to the guys who were driving the ambulances, driving the trains, doing whatever the actual work of the organization. They were very good at kind of turning up early in the morning, last thing at night, a night shift if that's what people were working. Just hi, just come for a coffee, how are you doing, how's it going, building those relationships quietly with the people who did the work in the organization, and good at one-to-one conversations, good in a board meeting where it's a relatively small number of people, not great at standing up in front of hundreds of people delivering a speech. That was not kind of natural for either of those guys, but very good at that kind of quiet, understated, understated is the best word for it, but kind of one-on-one leadership, and where everybody in the organization felt they knew these people individually because they'd worked really hard on those one-to-one relationships. So yeah, no, I think some of the best people I've worked with in my career have definitely been been introverts, and there's so much power in people who lead like that, I think.
So again, you have a podcast, Marketing for Introverts, and then you just put out a book, and I'm going to read the full title here. It says, Marketing for Introverts, How to Love It, Plan It, and Do It So That You Can Quietly and Successfully Promote Your Business in a Noisy World. I love that.
Oh, thank you. It's not the shortest subtitle, is it? But but yeah. I mean, there's so much advice for small businesses and small business owners about marketing their small business is about getting out there. You need to be visible. You need to be, it's such extrovert friendly advice. And it's like, well, how does that work if that's not the way you want to do business, if that's not the way you want to, we can all occasionally do the extrovert thing, but it's tiring. You can't sustain running and marketing a business, if it doesn't feel comfortable to you. So the book takes, some of the conversations and some of the thinking that came from the podcast and some of my own stories and experiences and things that have worked for me as well. But it's typical advice is very extrovert, I think. And I was just trying to redress the balance a little bit for those people that didn't work, because get out there more, do live video. Oh, it doesn't that's not everybody's thing, is it? Says the two of us who have podcasts where we don't put our faces out there, David. So maybe maybe I'm glad you're enjoying the book. It feels like maybe it was targeted at you as well.
I say this on all kinds of things, that sometimes when you're trying to be successful at whatever it is, the extrovert advice might not work. Like when I was younger, I read a book on how to overcome shyness. And looking back with what I know now, I'm sure that book was written by an extrovert. And it didn't work. It didn't work. And I was shy when I was younger. I'm not now. And a lot of my overcoming shyness and some anxiety was learning who I was as an introvert. An extrovert wasn't going to tell me that. My first book was Time Management and Productivity for Introverts, because I realized there's something different that we need that's not being called out in these other time management books I'm reading. And so how can introverts understand themselves to be better at marketing and do things in their way? And why might not extrovert advice work?
So I think the values piece, I sort of start by thinking about what are your values as an introvert, because if you know those, and if you can articulate those, and if you use those in your marketing, then that's just a great place. If you're pretending to be something you're not, then that's just never going to work. But if you're really clear that your values are about I don't know, family, or about great service, or that's not a brilliant example. Everybody says great service is one of their values, but if you start from that point, then I think that's really helpful. If you're then really clear about what you do and who you do it for, because it's easy to be woolly about those things. So I think those 2 points are incredibly helpful. Apart from which, if you've got those things really clearly on your website, then that's tremendously helpful. It saves a huge amount of explanation if you can be super clear about your offer, and then really thinking about your niche and your story. And it's we do need to talk about ourselves as small business owners. I don't think there's a way around that. If people want large faceless organizations, there are plenty out there, but as small business owners, one of the things that we are competing on, particularly as service business owners, one of the things that we are competing on is ourselves. It's our experience. It's our personality, our expertise. That's what we're selling. So we do need to kind of put our faces to that. But if you're really clear about your story and why that's important to you and who you are as a person, and I think you're right. I think some of that comes as you get older. I don't think I could have articulated this in my 20s, because I was too busy trying to kind of fit in and be extrovert and failing miserably. But I think all of these things become a little bit easier as you get older, and you maybe worry a little bit less what the rest of the world thinks about you. Maybe that's just me. But I mean, I having kind of thought about those areas in terms of marketing strategy, I take readers through, I think, 10 different sorts of marketing tactics that, and think about how they could work for you as an introvert. And, that includes video, it includes public speaking, it includes social media. So, how to make these things work for you as an introvert, because, they can all work for you. As we've both said, it's about finding the right way to do it for you. But yeah, it's about finding a way to be comfortable showing up as yourself in your marketing, because to do anything else is just unsustainable.
Yeah, and so I think that getting older is definitely a key, and definitely
that's lucky, isn't it? Because that's what
being yourself and not caring so much about what other people think, but in combination with understanding yourself, coming to understand who you are, your natural strengths. We talked earlier before we started about kids, and that we have introvert and extrovert children, and it comes to them naturally. They're their own people. And that is just really key. So understanding your natural abilities and also getting older helps too. So what might still introverts be fearful about when it comes to marketing?
I think when I speak to clients, there's a real reluctance to put their face on anything. The number of new clients I start working with, and I look at their website, and they're very often service businesses. They're often accountants or architects or lawyers, or they've got serious experience, and they're good at what they do, but they do not want to put their face on their website. So I think that's a fear. I think social media, I think people find draining very often. Networking is another thing that often people are not very comfortable doing. So and I'd love to be able to say to any of my clients, that's fine, you don't have to do any of those things. I'm afraid I can't let anybody off the hook in any of those. You really do need to put your face on your website if you're asking people to buy from you. But it's there are ways to do that more comfortably, or sometimes it's about getting the right help to get you through that. If you're putting an awful photograph of yourself on your website, then it is going to be a little bit difficult. But actually, if you find a great photographer who will take a great photo of you, then it's a little bit easier. So I think that those are some of the common fears. It's about having their face. Oh, I don't want to see myself. It's like, well, nobody's looking at you quite as critically as you're looking at yourself. So actually, there are ways we can do this. Sometimes it's about adopting the way that you're doing the marketing, and sometimes it's about understanding that nobody else is looking at you in the same depth and with the same critical eye that you're looking at yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you help people understand their story and sharing their story?
I mean, there's a process at the start of getting to know a client and talking to them, listening to them, and what's important to them. And part of that is about me talking about my story and, my family. And, I very often say, we're talking about our children. That's a typical conversation. I'm very often talking to people about their families, what they enjoy. So you kind of can build it up from there. But it's also about being clear what you're not going to talk about. You are allowed to get through your professional life and your marketing life without talking about your children. If that's an absolute barrier, it's kind of developing your story when you're talking about marketing yourself is not just about, I am going to talk about this, but as I say, you are allowed to put kind of very firm barriers, around your relationships or about your, family. But it might be that you want to talk about your, why you started your business, or the reason that you're so passionate about, doing things the way that you do, or serving the clients that you serve. And it might be that you don't want to talk about your kids, but you're quite happy to talk about your dog, for example. So it's finding those human and relatable things that make you different from, the other accountant or the other architect. There's always somebody else, isn't there, doing what we do? But it's just about talking about yourself and what makes you human and different, and that other people will go, oh yeah, that's the person I want to work with. In a sea of brilliantly qualified lawyers, this is the person that I could work with, or a sea of brilliantly qualified pensions advisors. This is the person I resonate and I connect with. So yeah, it's about finding the thing that makes them tick. But yeah, not feeling that you have to kind of spill your entire life story over LinkedIn, because that's not appropriate. Nobody wants.
Yeah,
Some people do that,
right.
actually, don't they? But you don't have to do that. That's not essential in your marketing. But put the barriers where you want the barriers. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah. And then maybe it's the next step, but how do you help them get clarity on what they're offering?
This is a really interesting one, isn't it? With professional services people, particularly, because very often they've spent years kind of getting to grips with their own professional expert. They're real experts. If I'm working with somebody who's in their 40s and they've been doing what they do since, and training for it for 20 years, then they're a real expert. So sometimes it helps that I don't know very much about pensions or accounts or architecture, and because their clients won't necessarily know a great deal about these. So it's asking the really sort of simple question. So what is it you do? What does that mean? What's the transformation that you offer? So trying to kind of keep them away from the professional jargon that every industry has, every profession has, and trying to kind of keep it really, not simple, because these aren't sort of simple professions. That the clients' businesses aren't simple, but it's trying to kind of get the clarity that their new clients will have. It's trying to think like their client, as opposed to thinking like the expert that they are, which is a difficult leap sometimes, but it's it's important. Otherwise they're writing a website or they're writing a social media post that's full of kind of technical expertise, but it's not answering the client's question. So sometimes the conversation is, when they first start talking to a client, what are the typical questions? When do I need to do a tax return, or how do I do a VAT return? Whatever the entry kind of questions are, it's thinking about those and answering those questions, rather than kind of getting mired deep in the the technical complexities of what it is they do. But yeah, no, that can be really hard when you're an expert in your area.
Yeah. And then how would you summarize? So in your book, you lay out a framework for marketing, especially for introverts. How would you summarize that?
I think it's back to those kind of the values as the basis of the of your marketing thinking. The who are you serving, and really understanding your customer, your potential client, and what it is, how it is that you help them, and then say that niche and that story kind of piece. And I think if you've got those kind of 5 elements, I think that's a really great part. The challenge, of course, is keeping going, because we can all do great marketing for a week or for a couple of weeks, and it's the kind of consistent approach in marketing, which is hard. I find it hard as well to kind of keep going. That's why I didn't do a blog, because I was struggling to be consistent with it. That's why I started a podcast, because I knew I could do it, because I brought somebody else in to help me, actually, David. Sometimes it's about having other people hold us accountable, having somebody that you know is going to help you with a fortnightly podcast, as opposed to promising yourself that you'll write a blog. So yeah, that that consistency is a challenge, and there's some kind of thoughts in the book about how you do that. But yeah, acknowledging that that's hard. And when you run a business by yourself, sometimes marketing is the thing that goes first. If you've got clients to deal with, or financial issues to deal with, or staffing issues to deal with, sometimes the marketing is the thing that falls to the bottom of your list. So yeah, understanding and acknowledging that's where small business owners often find themselves. I think I'm not trying to preach perfection to anybody who is trying to juggle all the things in their business.
So like you said, you lay out 10 different areas where introverts could look at for their marketing, and you mentioned social media. What advice are you giving for introverts on social media and how to be effective with it?
I think there's a danger, isn't there, that we all try to be on too many platforms. There's always the next bright, shiny social media platform. I don't know about you. I try to stay away from TikTok. I have a teenage child. He would be mortified if I tried to do anything at all. So that's really easy. I can stay away from that one. But
I think I was told I couldn't be on TikTok by my kids. So anyway,
brilliant. Yeah, same. So that's fine. So that's easy. But I mean, it's tempting always to think, oh, I need to do all of those things. You don't need to do all of those things. Pick the places, maybe the 2 places, or yeah, maybe 2, but 3 if you absolutely have to. But 2 is plenty. Where your clients are, and be there and do it well, because if you're trying to spread yourself across too many places, that's just too tiring. So and then you don't have to post every day, but if it's a case of kind of 2 or 3 times a week, keep it consistent. Use elements of your story, try to be as engaging. And it's not just about your own content, it's about talking to other people, isn't it? It's about, I think you and I have come across each other on LinkedIn, not just because I was interested in what you were saying and you were interested in what I was saying, but because we're both interested in other introverts as well. So it's not just about your own stuff, it's about finding the other people who are saying interesting things in your space and you're engaging with them. And that's what we're really good at, that as introverts. We're really good at building those relationships. So use those kind of skills that you have to build relationships in the same way on social media. But yeah, don't just post your own content, but engage with other people's content that's interesting to you, interesting conversations, things that are relevant to your clients. I mean, as a rule of thumb, I try to always engage with people who are my clients and my associates, and so I'm turning up for my people, as opposed to feeling like I'm trying to talk to the whole world. I think that's just really helpful. So kind of treat it as an extension of my other networks, rather than thinking about it as something else that's very separate. So yeah, I seek out people that I know and I like, and I try and talk to them.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because sometimes you hear like, well, you got to do everything, and that's not the case. And you're not trying to talk to the whole world. That's really important too. You need to find who it is that needs your help. You mentioned LinkedIn. Yeah, there's a group of introverts there that share or introvert thought leaders that share some great information and great advice and all of that. So you're not trying to talk to the whole world. And sometimes I think that we try to do that.
Yeah, we do, but you never quite know who's looking at your content either, because it can be really easy to think, oh, I didn't get very many likes on that post. And I bumped into, earlier this year I was randomly outside a train station in London. Now, I don't live anywhere near London, David. I don't go to London very often. And completely randomly, I bumped into a colleague, somebody I had not worked with in 10 years. She was going for a train. I was, coming away from the station. It was a very strange kind of moment. And we stood there and looked at each other and thought, is this really? And one of the first things she said was, after we, imagine, fancy meeting you outside Euston Station, she said, you've been talking about introverts, haven't you? Marketing for introverts, that's your thing. And I thought, my goodness me, I haven't spoken to you in such a long time. And there you are, outside a station in the middle of London, telling me that you've been keeping an eye on what I do on social media. So don't get despondent when it feels like nobody's looking, because actually people are just keeping an eye on you, even if they're not commenting, or even if they're not liking your stuff. So you never quite know who's looking, which is one of the most frustrating things about social media. But it has an interesting power like that. So yeah, don't get discouraged, I guess is my message from that particular conversation.
Yeah, I've had that experience. It's like I more than once where I, saw a friend of mine that I don't see all the time. It's like, oh, I love your podcast. And I'm thinking, and not one like, you know.
Thanks. Yeah.
But it's a really good example. Like you don't
Yeah.
know who's watching, listening, and benefiting because they're not always going to like or even comment. So that's really good to remember that. I had another guest on, and she was saying, there's a lot of lurkers out there that are,
Yeah.
that are not engaging, but they are engaging in liking or commenting, but they are reading and enjoying and benefiting from your work.
And it's going in, isn't it? And at the point at which they want you or need you, or they're recommending something, that you just never know. As I say, it's one of the frustrating things about social media. It's one of the frustrating things about marketing. You never quite know which bit is working, but something is working somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything else? We talked a lot about marketing for introverts, with your podcast, with your book. Is there any other marketing for introverts type advice that you want to share?
Networking. I don't know what your view is of networking, David. It is one of those conversations that a lot of introverts go, "Oh my goodness, it's my least favorite thing ever, and I avoid it like the plague." I don't know if you've done much networking.
So I think that we network differently. You talked about a previous CEO that was really skilled at one-on-one. I think that we need to remember that. As far as like a networking event, I don't really enjoy the going in and bouncing around from person to person. I think I've had a lot of people on my show talking about networking, so there's different things you can
Yeah,
do.
different
There's
schools of
different,
thought.
but what it comes down to for me is what's your goal for networking?
Yeah.
And it might be different than your extroverted friend. Like if I go with the extroverted friend to an event, she might want to meet 100 people all at once and remember them. And
There's
great.
that expression, isn't there? Work the room. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
I
work
could
the
work the
room.
room if my life depended on it.
Yeah, but if I go to a networking event and I have one or two really great conversations, they could be with someone I already know and I get to know them better, or it could be with
Yeah.
somebody new. I'm probably going to be pretty happy. An extrovert probably will not be happy meeting a couple people at a big networking event. And there's other ways, we're talking about social media. I love my podcast, talking to great people like you. This is a form of networking for me. I love meeting new people that share interests and goals. And so
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
lots of things like that.
And sometimes it's a good way, isn't it, to have a good conversation about something. You couldn't just send a message say, "Do you want to come and have a chat for an hour about something?" Actually, it's much easier to say, "Come on to the podcast." But no, I agree with you about the networking. I think sometimes it's in the preparation, isn't it? It's thinking who is going to be there, and that's the two or three people that I just want to say hello to, just want to see face to face, and then it's in the follow up, because it's much easier then to connect with them later on LinkedIn, or send them an email, or arrange to have a kind of a one-to-one where it's just the two of you over a coffee. So yeah, I think it's how you use it, but I absolutely appreciate that people find it very, very difficult. The other thing I think is somebody is going to say to you, what is it, what do you do, David, what do you do, Jenny? And you need to have your answer down for that, don't you? You just need to have the kind of 2-line piece that says, this is what I do. Because yeah, don't get flummoxed by somebody asking you what you do. That's you just need to have that script in your head a little bit, which is not always very comfortable, but that's just part of your toolkit, I think, when you walk into a networking event.
Yeah, and that's something to understand about introverts. We think before we speak. We like to think ahead of time. And if you don't have that ready, you could feel on the spot and just sometimes not even come up with anything to say. And so that's a key to knowing, you know what, I'm a great thinker. I don't always think on the spot. So if I go to this event and I have something ready to say, I might have a couple interesting things I want to talk about. But, don't feel boxed in. Like, I don't live my life in a scripted way, but just to
No, but it's
have
a
some
given,
things
isn't it?
ready. You have some
Yeah.
things ready to talk about and not get put on the spot, because
Yeah.
that was a huge discovery for me is, not being ready for those kinds of questions or in so many areas of life and not realizing, hey, you know what? You think before you speak. It's a good thing. You're coming up with great answers. You're solving problems. You're being creative. But your gift isn't just to think out loud, and that's not your gift, but you do have a gift and you just have to use it and understand how you have to prepare for
and
it.
work to that strength. Yes, absolutely. Spontaneous. I'm not sure I'd be great at stand up. I've never tried it, but I'm not sure that would be
I,
mine.
you know, I don't know either. That comes up like stand up and improv come up on this show where introverts have used that to,
Oh,
and I'm like,
really?
and the improv one kind of puzzles me because it's like, all right, well, I'm not good at thinking on my feet, so would I be good at improv? But there's a lot of guests that have been on here that are introverts and are comedians, and it's interesting, or actors, and again, lots of myths out there. Introverts
It
can be.
it genuinely takes all sorts, doesn't it? But we're a big chunk of the population. There's no reason why all introverts should think and act and behave the same, because I mean it depends what you read.
Yeah,
But we're 40%, 50% of the population. So
yeah,
yeah, I guess we've all got different strengths. But
yeah, yeah,
that sounds terrifying to me. But yeah,
yeah,
I like to be a little bit prepared for a networking event, to have an answer to, and what is it that you do, because I'm going to be asked that. But yeah, sometimes going to a networking event with an extrovert friend, because you can just kind of sail around with them. Sometimes
yeah,
that's how. Tell
yeah.
you my other
There's
very practical tip, actually, David, for success in a networking event is wear something very bright. Maybe this doesn't work for guys in the same way, but I can walk into a room with wearing something bright red or bright pink or bright green, like I'm wearing today, and people, even if they don't get, I don't have to talk to people, that they know I'm there because they've seen me, because I'm the girl in the bright red jacket or whatever. So that's a sort of sneaky dressing for success type tip, which, as I say, might not work for guys because you've got
I'll have
suits
to
on.
try it. I haven't
Yeah,
tried
try
that.
a red suit
I'll
next
try
time you
it.
go
Yeah,
networking and
yeah.
let me know how that goes.
We talked a lot about a lot of great things today. It's strengths of introverts, marketing for introverts. Is there anything else you want to add, Jenny?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
No,
Yeah,
that's been fascinating. It's always interesting, isn't it, to talk to other introverts, because we get each other in a way that
yeah,
sometimes our nearest and dearest extroverts don't always quite get us. So it's always a pleasure to talk to a like-minded person.
that's
All the
for
way to
sure.
Arizona, but all the way to the UK.
Yeah, that's right. That's for sure. And that's part of it. For far too long, we've felt, I shouldn't say that. So, not all introverts have felt misunderstood. Some have never felt misunderstood, but many of us have. And for far too long, we've been misunderstood. And it's really nice to have conversations like this where you feel understood. So, I definitely have felt that way talking with you today, and it's been really nice.
Bless you. Yes, me too. It's so there's always a lot we could talk about, isn't it? And we don't do the small talk. We're straight into the big important stuff about introverts. So yeah, no, absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it was funny. I had a guest on one time, and we were talking before I hit record, and she's like, "All right, well, we got that small talk out of the way," and it was just,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
was just,
yeah.
it was funny. It was funny. All right, and of course, Jenny, where can people find out more about the great work that you do in your book and your podcast?
Thank you. So I guess the best place to connect with me would be on LinkedIn. It's Jenny Procter with an E, slightly strange spelling. And if you go onto Amazon and look up marketing for introverts, you will find me there.
All right. Well, thank you again for being on the show. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you ever so much for having me. It's been great.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to further connecting with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts, links to social media, and other items. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there's now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the four-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link to the show notes. There's so many great things about being an introvert, so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.